Assalamu alaikum. So I welcome you all to another class, another lecture. Today we're going to study about the regulation of calcium and phosphatines. So calcium and phosphate metabolism, the excretion or the absorption of calcium and the determination of level of calcium and phosphate in blood is determined by different hormones. The main hormones being the parathyroid hormone and the calcitonin as well as the vitamin D. So there are these three hormones which are primarily concerned with the regulation of calcium and the phosphate metabolism. The parathyroid hormone, the calcitonin 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol, which is also known as vitamin D. The main hormone that is responsible for its regulation is the parathyroid hormone and the calcitonin. Parathyroid hormone is the next hormone that we are going to study, and it is secreted by the parathyroid gland. So these are small glands which are 4 in number, 2 on each side, 2 superior glands and 2 inferior glands, one on the right and one on the left, and they are known as parathyroid because they are located in close vicinity to the thyroid gland, or they are located just next to the thyroid gland, embedded within the thyroid gland. So they are located in the upper and the lower pole of the posterior surface of thyroid gland. As we can see here, these are the parathyroid glands. This is the left superior parathyroid, the right superior parathyroid, the left inferior and the right inferior parathyroid gland. And this larger lobe below it is the thyroid gland. So we can see the position of the parathyroid clearly here. Now let's proceed further. So if we look at the parathyroid gland, what can we see? The parathyroid gland, just a second. If we look at the histology of the parathyroid gland, it has two types of cells: chief cells and oxyphilic cells, oxyphil cells. The chief cells are the main cells that are responsible for the secretion of parathyroid hormone, and they are more in number as compared to the oxyphil cells. Oxyphil cells are sparse in the parenchyma of the parathyroid, and their function is less known or not known. So whenever we are going to talk about the parathyroid, we are mainly talking about these chief cells. These are the RBCs, red blood cells, which are located within the parathyroid. So removal of half the parathyroid glands usually causes no major physiological abnormalities. However, removal of 3 or 4 of the normal glands would cause transient hypoparathyroidism. So if we remove 2 parathyroid glands, 1 or 2 parathyroid glands by mistake during surgery, due to iatrogenic causes or any other cause, if there's destruction or removal of up to 2 parathyroid glands, there is no major change in the absorption or excretion of calcium, because the other remaining 2 or 3 glands would compensate for the function of those 2 parathyroid glands which we removed. But if we remove 3 to 4 parathyroid glands, then the patient would undergo a condition that is known as hypoparathyroidism, or decreased amount of parathyroid hormone within the blood and the body. The parathyroid hormone is also known as the parathormone. It is polypeptide in nature and has 84 amino acids. And the main sites where the parathyroid hormone acts are the bones, the kidney and the gastrointestinal tract. So the places where you'd find abundant calcium or need to reabsorb calcium from are the main places where this hormone would act. So now let's talk about some functions of the parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone increases the blood calcium level. So you need to remember this point. Always remember the parathyroid hormone and the calcitonin, they would cancel each other. Their function would be opposite to each other. Parathyroid hormone would increase serum calcium level via reabsorption of calcium and phosphate from the bone. So it would break the bone, extract the calcium from the bone, make the bone weakened, and then that calcium would come into circulation, and that calcium would circulate in the human serum. So it would increase calcium level, but if there is increased parathyroid hormone, it would weaken the bones. Remember this point. We're going to discuss about it later on too. So first, it has effect on bone. Moreover, it causes reabsorption of the calcium and phosphate from the intestines via acting on vitamin D. So via 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol, it would increase the reabsorption of calcium and phosphate from the intestine, gastrointestinal tract. It would also cause decreased excretion of calcium from kidney. So it is acting on all the three major structures which are responsible in the regulation of calcium ion and the phosphate, and it is conserving the calcium. So remember this, it is conserving the calcium in the body. It decreases the phosphate concentration by excessive renal phosphate excretion from the proximal convoluted tubule. So it would conserve the calcium and excrete the phosphate. Remember this. Reabsorb calcium but promotes the excretion of phosphate from the proximal convoluted tubule of the kidney. Proximal convoluted tubule we've already studied in the renal anatomy when we were studying that. Before the loop of Henle comes the proximal convoluted tubule, and parathyroid hormone would act on the proximal convoluted tubule, and it would cause excessive excretion of the phosphate ion. Renal excretion is usually great enough to override increased phosphate absorption from the bone. So the phosphate that is extracted from the bone under the effect of parathyroid hormone is less as compared to the excretion of phosphate from the kidneys. So in total, at the end, it would cause increased calcium in the blood but decreased phosphate in the blood. Remember this one. Increases calcium in the serum, decreases phosphate in the serum. Now let's talk in depth about the action of parathyroid hormone on bone. So it causes reabsorption of calcium and phosphate from the bone, and reabsorption of calcium would occur in two phases: rapid phase and slow phase. So what is rapid phase? Rapid phase stands for osteolysis, in which bone is being broken down by this hormone. So parathyroid hormone activates the calcium pump, which is located in the osteocytic membrane system. This calcium pump would pump calcium from the bone fluid to the extracellular fluid. So remember, the bone is made up of molecules that are known as calcium hydroxyapatite. The calcium is being extracted from that molecule and being thrown into the extracellular fluid. So in turn, it is In other words, it is breaking down the bone calcium and throwing it into the circulation. So if the action of parathyroid hormone is increased, it would cause weakened bones. Bones would become weak, more weak. Whereas the other phase is the slow phase, where it causes activation of osteoclasts which are already formed, or it would cause formation of new osteoclasts. So if you remember the lecture on bone, there were three types of cells in the bone. Osteoblasts, which would cause maturation of the bone or formation of new bone. Osteocytes are the mature bone cells, and osteoclasts are those cells which break down the bone. So these osteoclasts, which are being activated by the parathyroid hormone, would reabsorb the bony matrix and release the calcium phosphate from the bone into the blood. So the whole cycle which was taking place earlier is being repeated here. So in both phases, in the slow phase and the rapid phase, this would be the result. This is how the parathyroid hormone would act. So when the parathyroid hormone acts on receptors in osteocytes and osteoblasts, it would cause increased activity of calcium pump on the membrane, and in turn would cause calcium from the bone fluid being pumped into the extracellular fluid. Whereas when it would act in slow phase, it would act on receptors in osteocyte and osteoblasts, and via some unknown factor it would activate osteoclasts. These osteoclasts would break down the bone, reabsorb the bony matrix, and release calcium phosphate into the circulation. And this in the end would cause increased calcium phosphate in the blood. So this is how it is acting. Parathyroid hormone is attaching with the bone, acting on the osteocyte and the osteoblast, activating the calcium channels and throwing out the calcium channels in membrane and throwing out the calcium and phosphate into the extracellular fluid. Okay, so it is another representation of the action of parathyroid hormone. Now, how is the release of parathyroid hormone regulated? So the release of parathyroid hormone is regulated in turn via negative feedback of serum calcium level. So what happens is, if there is decreased serum calcium in the extracellular fluid, it would cause increased release of parathyroid hormone from the parathyroid gland. So decreased calcium level in extracellular fluid would cause activation of the parathyroid gland, which would release more parathyroid hormone that would act on three structures. First, the bone, where it would cause increased bone reabsorption via the slow and the rapid phases, as we've discussed earlier, and this would cause increased calcium in the extracellular fluid. Secondly, it would act on the kidneys and would cause increased reabsorption of calcium from the kidneys. Moreover, it would act via vitamin D on the intestines and would cause increased absorption from the gastrointestinal tract. So all of it would result in increased serum calcium level or increased calcium level in the extracellular fluid. When this extracellular fluid contains ample calcium or extra calcium, it would give negative feedback to the parathyroid gland, which would stop producing any more parathyroid hormone. Apart from this calcium, we also take some dietary calcium, So the excess quantity of calcium in diet or increased vitamin D in diet or bone absorption caused by factors other than parathyroid hormone, all of these things would also cause increased calcium in the extracellular fluid. And this increased calcium in the extracellular fluid would also give negative feedback to the parathyroid gland to stop the release of any more parathyroid hormone. So this is how the regulation of secretion of parathyroid hormone is carried out. The next hormone that we're going to discuss is the calcitonin. So remember when I told you earlier, calcitonin in its function is direct opposite to the parathyroid hormone. Calcitonin is also a peptide hormone which is secreted by the parafollicular cells of thyroid gland. So the follicular cells would release the T3 and T4 or thyroid hormones, thyroxine, etc., triiodothyronin and tetraiodothyronin, whereas the parafollicular cells, which are present in between the follicles or around the follicles, would release this hormone that is known as calcitonin. Calcitonin is the hormone that would be released when there is increased calcium in the plasma. So the primary stimulus for calcitonin secretion is the increased plasma calcium ion concentration. So if there is decreased calcium ion concentration in plasma, parathyroid hormone is released and calcitonin is not released or stopped. Whereas if there is decreased parathyroid hormone, so when there is decreased calcium in the blood, parathyroid hormone is released, whereas if there is increased calcium in the blood, calcitonin would be released. The main function of the calcitonin is to decrease blood calcium level. How it does that? It would act on the same things where the parathyroid hormone is acting and have an opposite effect. So calcitonin's function is opposite to that of the parathyroid hormone. It would decrease the absorptive activities of the osteoclasts, whereas parathyroid was activating these cells. It would decrease the formation of new osteoclasts, and in turn it would increase reabsorption of calcium into the bone and decrease the serum calcium level or the calcium level in the blood. Calcitonin also has minor effects on the calcium handling in the kidneys, tubules and the intestines. So renal tubules and intestines, it also has effect on that, and it would cause more excretion from the of the calcium from the kidneys and less reabsorption from the intestines. Calcitonin has a weak effect on plasma calcium concentration in the adult human, as function of calcitonin is overridden by the parathyroid hormone. So remember, parathyroid hormone is the stronger one in between these two hormones. So if parathyroid hormone is acting, calcitonin would not be able to act. Parathyroid hormone overrides the action of calcitonin. So again the same picture, what would happen if calcitonin is acting here? It would decrease the action of the osteoclast, would close the calcium channels, and in turn cause more reabsorption of calcium into the bone and decrease the serum calcium level. Now the last hormone that is responsible for the calcium regulation, it is the vitamin D. So vitamin D is a group of fat soluble vitamins. there are two major forms of which the vitamin D2, which is also known as ergocalciferol, and vitamin D3 or cholecalciferol. The active form of these is calcitriol, that is 125 dihydroxy cholecalciferol. It is a hormone that is secreted by the cells of kidneys proximal convoluted tubules. So, how the metabolism of vitamin D occurs? Let's take a look at that. So, what happens is via sunlight, 7-dehydrocholesterol is converted into cholecalciferol, that is known as vitamin D3. Moreover, when we intake meat, that is fish or other types of red meat or white meat, we intake vitamin D3. Moreover, there are supplements such as the supplements used by bodybuilders, etc., or the multivitamins which are used by the elder population, Cerbex, etc. These multivitamins, they can to contain vitamin D2. So this vitamin D2, D3, as well as the cholecalciferol that was formed due to effect of sunlight on 7-dehydrocholesterol, all of this would travel to the liver via portal system or via the circulation. When it reaches the liver, it is converted into 25 hydroxy vitamin D3, which when circulating through the blood reaches to the kidney is converted into 125 dihydroxy cholecalciferol. So the activated form is formed by the proximal convoluted tubules of the kidney. So this 125 dihydroxy cholecalciferol is also known as calcitriol. This calcitriol acts on the calcitriol receptor complex, which then activates the messenger RNA, which goes in turn to act on the calcium binding proteins and cause calcium reabsorption in the kidneys and the gut. This calcium is then transported to the plasma, and this would increase bone formation. This would be used in bone formation, and bone turnover would increase. The activation of the 25 dihydroxy calciferol to 125 dihydroxy cholecalciferol occurs under the effect of parathyroid hormone. So parathyroid hormone is activated via increased calcium reabsorption, and it would in turn cause activation of vitamin D3 in the kidney. This vitamin D3 would help parathyroid hormone to reabsorb materials, to reabsorb calcium from the gastrointestinal tract. So under normal conditions, vitamin D acts to raise plasma calcium level and phosphate level. Thus vitamin D promotes bone deposition. This is accomplished by 125 dihydroxy cholecalciferol, increasing the absorption of calcium, and phosphate by intestinal mucosa by increasing the production of calcium binding proteins in the intestinal mucosa. Moreover, it would result in higher concentrations of calcium and phosphate in the extracellular fluid, which is precipitated into the bony matrix. And 125 dihydroxy cholecalciferol would also increase the reabsorption of calcium by the renal distal tubule. So what happens is when more cholecalciferol activated cholecalciferol is being absorbed, it would mean more calcium. That would mean more calcium being deposited in the bone. That would in turn increase the release of parathyroid hormone. If there is abnormally high activity, 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol would increase bone resorption and release of calcium and phosphate from the bone. So it would act the same way as the parathyroid hormone acts. If there is deficiency of vitamin D or activated form of vitamin D, calcitriol, what would happen? There would be decreased calcium and phosphate absorption from gut and kidney, which would result in decreased blood calcium serum, calcium and phosphate level. This would decrease mineralization in the bone, which would cause weakened bones or decalcified bones. It would also cause negative feedback leading to parathyroid hormone secretion, which would release more calcium phosphate from the bony matrix, which in turn would have the same effect and weaken the bones more. So if there is vitamin D3 deficiency or calcitriol deficiency, it would end up in hollow kind of bones being breaking down more, and it would cause rickets in children and osteomalacia in results in adults. So why do the body break down bones for acquiring calcium? The thing is, calcium is very important for our normal body processes. Remember, cells are bags of calcium. So what happens is, if there is decreased calcium level, our body is very sensitive to that. Our heart may stop beating in a rhythm. There may be rhythm problems, which is known as arrhythmia. So due to irregular beats, a patient may develop clots, patient may die. The muscles, the cells, they stop normal functioning. There may be muscle cramps, many other problems. That is why maintaining a swift calcium level is more important as compared to maintaining healthy bones. So body prefers maintaining calcium level as compared to maintaining healthier bones. The solution to this problem is regular intake of calcium, milk, etc., and vitamin D3 supplements. Now, if there is excess, this was the condition where there was deficiency of vitamin D3 in the body. If there is excess of vitamin D3 in the body, what happens? It would activate osteoblasts, which would activate osteoclasts, which would in turn cause bone resorption. So we need to maintain a level of vitamin D3. Although vitamin D would increase the intestinal absorption of calcium and phosphate, thereby increasing interstitial calcium and phosphate levels and promoting calcium deposition in the bones, the direct effect of vitamin D on the bone is resorption. Remember this. The direct effect, this can be an MCQ. Direct effect of vitamin D on the bones is bone resorption. So excess vitamin D, if taken, would also result in breaking down of bones. So it would cause excess bone resorption, leading to osteoporosis. Bone would break down and porous bones would be left. This is especially common in postmenopausal women where there is no effect of estrogen. Osteoporosis is common in that age group. So note that either a deficiency or excess of vitamin D would produce inadequate bone mineralization, porous bones which are easier to break. So I would say this marks the end of this lecture. The calcium regulation and the other things we'll study in the next lecture, inshallah. Okay, Allah Hafiz. Okay, so I hope I've changed some settings. I hope that this resolves the issue of the screen freezing or the slide freezing during lecture. So please let me know what was the outcome, if the solution worked or not. I'll be waiting for your replies. So, and about the questions that I gave you, we'll discuss that questions someday, maybe on Thursday. I'll let you guys know about the discussion session. I will hold that on LinkedIn. Okay, then.